Good evening, everyone. I am Jen Bordeaux, and this is another segment of Family Law Uncorked. Today, I am so honored to be joined by both of my guests. And I know all of our screens look a little bit differently, but so below me, I have Elizabeth Stevenson, who is one of the founding partner at New Direction Family Law. And then we are also joined today by Judge Vincent Rozier. Thank you, Judge, for joining us.
Thank you, Judge.
Glad to be here.
So we, again, are very honored to have you. And this came about from a story and experience that you shared to the public on your Facebook page. So before we dive into that, though, do you mind just letting the world, whoever's watching, and myself included, know a little bit about you and your journey and how you got to where you are today?
All right. Yes. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this and disseminating information so that people actually know the reality of different things as opposed to just trying to go with urban legend and screwing themselves over. So I'm Judge Vincent Rozier. I'm a resident Superior Court judge in Wake County. We travel all around, usually within a particular division. And so I hold court now anywhere from Union County, well, anywhere in the state, just where we get assigned. Used to be a district court judge roughly for about 10.5 years. And early on, I was assigned to family court. And so I had the opportunity to work with Attorney Stevenson and see her skills and see her blossom and grow. After I got out, I've seen her grow even more. It's a particular place where you see people come in at some of their most vulnerable points in life. And if they're not able to work it out, pass it over to trusted attorneys and then a judge who knows nothing about them.
That's absolutely true.
And then see what happens. Very often with the most valuable things in their lives, which can be their money, their homes, but very often their children. And so I felt like I grew up a little bit by being in there. Well, I probably grew up a lot because part of the story also is that I became a judge at the age of 29. I was the youngest judge that we've had in Wake County, period, since we started actually calling everybody a judge. So since like 1969, I guess, I was the youngest judge. And while I was in family court and going through training for juvenile court, I discovered from going to a training that the male brain, we know that we develop more slowly than our female counterparts, but I was 29 or 30 at that point in time, learning that the male brain isn't fully developed for most people until about the age of 30. I came home and asked my wife if I could get a pass on everything that I'd done before 30. That didn't work. But anyway, I'm from a place called Tar Heel, North Carolina. There's the actual small town, Tar Heel, on the way to the beach down Highway 87 in Bladen County. From there, I went to Carolina. People at Carolina didn't believe that I was from Tar Heel. They thought it was a bad joke. And then from there, I went to North Carolina Central School of Law over in Durham, became a prosecutor, and then after being a prosecutor, was able to become a district court judge back in 2006.
Awesome. And so now you're a Superior Court judge, correct?
Now I'm a Superior Court judge, doing everything from appeal, speeding tickets, all the way up to capital murder.
That's
a little bit of a range.
That's a wide range. I like my little niche. That's good.
So I have to ask you this: do you ever miss family law? If
you know,
say no, it's fine.
No, sometimes I do. Whenever I got out, I just wanted a break because of the intensity of what it is that you're doing. I used to say, and I almost would get emotional whenever I would tell people that whenever you have a custody case, that is a district court judge's life sentence. Because
That's true.
If you really get it wrong, then you can really have a negative impact or a positive impact on a child or children or family that's going to last a lifetime. And so the intensity of that, I just wanted a break, but because of the family court nature of things, either you're in or you're out. So I said, I'll get out.
Yeah, but either love it or you hate it. It's one or the other. But
yeah. But there are times whenever I wouldn't mind. And like with anything, you have good folks, bad folks. Attorney Stevenson, she was one of those attorneys that whenever you came in the courtroom, you kind of had the sense that you're actually going to get to the case as opposed to just somebody who's going to take on the emotions of their client, which makes it more difficult for the judge. It may make the person that they're representing feel good, but it makes it more difficult for the judge.
Right.
the attorneys who came in who were like that, I mean, frankly, I miss seeing some of them. There were some good lawyers. There were some poor performing lawyers. They had more knowledge of family law than I did when I first came in, but they just weren't able to translate that into the courtroom. That's probably a long answer to say no. I don't miss them.
No, it's great. Well, you know what? As they always say in law, it depends.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. And thank you for carving out some time for us today. We were very excited to have you and be able to have this platform for whoever sees it, watches it later, now, whatever, just to get the information out there. So with that, we will get to the foundation and the purpose for the discussion here. So with everything going on and the Black Lives Matter movement and the social unrest, and rightly so, that is happening, it is so important, as you said, to disseminate this information and to just get it out there, to start having these conversations, and to let people know that it's real. I think there are still so many people that have a hard time accepting the fact that racism is real. And I think sometimes they try to fit into a box that people that are experiencing that, you know, look like or sound like, or even it's just it can be a complete stereotype of what they think that looks like, if they even do believe that it still exists. So on your Facebook, you called for people to, you know, for Black people that had experienced you know, negativity or had mistreatment due to the color of their skin, you called for them to share their stories with you if they felt so compelled. And from what I could tell, people did start to share their stories with you. So what kind of effect did that have, or what was your goal in doing that to begin with?
Well, the goal actually is specifically what you just pointed out, that, and I mean, I have a wide variety of friends on Facebook, and for some of those people, if I would go through their pages and see their comments or the comments of their friends, it seems as though there's this idea that you have to officially be doing something negative in order for you to have an experience of what we call racism. And back home, I guess in the country, you say hogwash, or maybe 50 years ago they did.
I'm from Sampson County, so I completely understand.
Yeah.
I mean, now we'd probably say something else, but yeah, I just wanted to try to bring together a collection of stories that would represent folks who aren't your stereotypical, the person that you see on TV, who's committing some crime, who has some long list of felonies on their record, and they have some sort of encounter that they brought on themselves and basically requested to be discriminated against or to have their constitutional rights challenged in some sort of way. And so I thought that it might be good to try to collect those stories, one, to see that it's something that is spread throughout the country, or at least in our case, just like North Carolina specifically, but that it cuts across so many different people and personalities and appearances. I mean, the way that people are presenting themselves. Everybody's not walking down the street wearing a wife beater or a hoodie and then they're getting profiled.
Right.
You can be, I've received stories of somebody in a courtroom and the way that they were approached, or actually two stories. One, I mean, just briefly, just one attorney who's in a courtroom in a different place, and I guess he's the only African-American male there. And I've heard it before. People walk up and start asking them for their bar card because they want to make sure that they are actually an attorney. One person, he's an attorney who actually has longer hair and braids or twists, and his client was African-American as well, and his client was an older gentleman who came dressed nicely, and the officer that I just have, hopefully I'm not stalling any, but.
No, you're good.
Oh no, I think we're just sitting here still.
No.
The officer took the witness stand and identified the client instead of the attorney, just because of just that perception that the person that's has the hair in this way must be a criminal. And so I wanted to have a collection of stories that would just present to people who were not believers, to open their eyes a little bit. One of the things as judges, we can't really advocate too much for any positions or anything of that sort, but we can educate. And every now and then we'll find ourselves challenging our own biases in court because we see enough that we can become prejudiced. We prejudge. And I mean, as a judge, you want somebody who's going to sit and wait and hear all of the evidence. And Whenever you're sitting in court, after a while, you can find yourself subject to that as well. So I want to try to challenge people's the knowledge that they may think that what they believe they know.
Yeah, and I had a friend she's a flight nurse out in the western part of the state, and she shared her experience on Facebook, and I don't know how many comments later after it, which was a powerful experience, a moving experience, just like you had shared. And just in the comments, there was a racial comment that was made back just in response to her sharing, being vulnerable and showing that strength and sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
And it just enrages me.
Yeah. And the thing for me was just in throwing that out there, it is already an assumption amongst most African-American men that they've had some run-in. And so whenever I actually emailed a few of my friends, and it wasn't like, oh, well, I don't have one. I mean, somebody said, I really don't have one other than this right here, which is kind of the common, like other than just like being at college and being stopped because they don't think you belong on campus. And so, I mean, it's just a part of just growing up as an African-American male in the United States was kind of the response that I got.
Right. And my paralegal, Busy Little, has a biracial son, and he's still in elementary school. And they've been to the protests, but I have a 17-year-old son that I don't have to worry about when he goes out at night. I haven't had to have a talk with him about how to keep yourself safe. And Busy, with her 9-year-old, has already had to have those conversations about that.
It is, I mean, it's known as the talk. And
right.
Most people are just trying to, in my discussions, they try to figure out when to present it or how to present it. But it starts before that. I mean, I had versions of it growing up because at 43, I was born in 76. North Carolina schools weren't integrated till 71. And so, or fully integrated from bottom to top in all places. And so I remember just being in school and people warning me, okay, you don't do this, you don't do that. And then whenever you get higher up, I was fortunate enough to be in a position to be valedictorian of my class. And people were warning me throughout high school that somebody is going to try to do something, that I had to walk a straight line because they were going to try to come up with some excuse to take that away from me based on the past and their belief that it had happened in the past. And then lo and behold, I married someone and my father-in-law, it actually had happened to him.
That's just like, so do you mind, I mean, Judge Rozier, do you mind sharing your story that you wrote on Facebook? Because it really was very powerful.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'm hoping now that it's one of those things that was somewhat of a emotionally painful experience in certain ways, that it helps somebody else.
Right.
As I mentioned, I used to be a prosecutor. After graduating law school, we would have judges conferences now, but prosecutor conferences where you would go usually to the east or to the west. And then after going to New Bern one year and hanging out with friends, going to their rooms, I put in there that's where I discovered Dave Chappelle, because they had a DVD of the first season. And so after being in their rooms and watching Dave Chappelle and having a really good time, I was just walking back to my car at the convention center in New Bern. And I was parked at a parking lot that was in the other hotel, because there were two hotels where the DAs were staying. And so I was just walking on the sidewalk, and I remember just seeing at the intersection, the police officer just go past. And as soon as he went past, he stopped his car and then just backed it up and then just came right at me. From what I recall, activated his lights, got out the car, approached me and just wanted to know more or less why I was there, because there had been some break-ins in the past. He didn't say anything about anybody breaking in that night. I wasn't really close to the cars because I was walking down the sidewalk where most law-abiding people would walk. I mean, I wasn't walking in the middle of the street or anything. I was just minding my business, thinking about Dave Chappelle skits. And so I tell him that I'm there at a DA's conference, that I'm a DA. And I just remember him telling me that you know why I'm doing this then. And in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, you're racist.
Yeah,
That's why you're doing it. your racist, you're profiling me for walking while Black. I mean, driving while Black is something in most modern days is something that people would refer to. And being a DA, I was familiar with that from people who would say, oh, they just stopped me because I'm Black, but I really didn't get too many walking while Blacks. And so then, I mean, I'm put in a position, sit down on the curb of the street while he runs my information, takes my license, asks me for my license, takes my license, calls it in the same way that they would tell us in court how they would take someone's information and run it through the system. And so I'm aware of everything that's going on. And I'm just sitting there just kind of in disbelief in some ways, but at the same time, just realizing that this is what's going on, that this is just my turn. I just commented earlier and I put in my post that this was kind of my opportunity to experience the initiation of full Black maleness in America. I mean, that's how I felt.
Right.
I almost had I was like 2 classes short of a minor in AFAM and African-American history at Carolina. And one of the things that I just remember from class and maybe even from high school was just how whenever a slave would leave a plantation, you had to have your papers with you showing who you were. Otherwise, they might think you were a runaway slave. And that's just what was going through my mind, thinking, okay, I'm sitting here in a position where I regularly work with law enforcement. Now I'm being challenged when I've done nothing wrong, as if I'm a runaway slave, and wondering, okay, what has actually changed in the country such that this is just the experience. One other thing that, I mean, yeah, it challenges you. The bravado side of me would say that it didn't faze me or that it wouldn't affect me, but the fact that it happened in, I guess, 2005 or 2004, and then I didn't really share it with anybody until 2020. I suppose there's some reason for that. Yeah. Because it challenges, whenever you're somebody who works in the system, you have flags behind you and you feel like you're kind of working with law enforcement, you're trying to work for justice, that put yourself in a position of being treated less than a citizen. I mean, it has an impact. I did share that a part of Black maleness is the fact that you're not supposed to let anything faze you. And so the fact that it seemed like it might faze me was the part that would almost make me feel disappointed. So you kind of have to give yourself a gut check and say, okay, as we would say, I'm hardcore. That's not going to faze me. So, so you just kind of, that's probably not Black maleness. That's just probably just being a man.
Well, maybe that. So what's changed, if anything? Anything? Or has it gotten, we may have changed for the worse? I
mean, I didn't have the full array of things that you see on TV, but from the stories that I've got, at least for a long while, I know things didn't change. And trying to look at more statistics recently, I mean, I'm hoping, I almost believe that in North Carolina, there's been some progress because there is some data, at least with Raleigh police, and this was in New Bern, this wasn't Raleigh. Raleigh police, they've had a decrease in searches whenever you would stop somebody for a speeding ticket. And for some reason, even though you're stopping them for a speeding ticket, there's a reason to get them out of the car and then pat them down just to try to and search their car just because they're speeding. You know, actually, I don't think anything significantly has changed. I'll add one more part. I'll add this one more part, this one additional part. Because I've worked with law enforcement, I mean, I recognize that there are just aberrations and there are just some people who, for lack of a better phrase, they suck at doing their job. Or that they're prejudiced or racist, that bring in those biases with them. And that's natural. For people who are familiar with Christianity, for whatever religion they may practice, if they're familiar with that, they'll understand that most people hear about Jesus having 12 disciples. I mean, one betrayed him, one denied him, and one didn't believe what he was saying whenever eventually would play it out with him coming back for that religion. And so that's 3 out of 12. And I'm thinking that police officers, you're going to have a better shot of having good police officers more than 3 out of 12. I mean, I think that there are few bad apples. But whenever you have those bad scenarios and those bad situations, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth considering the history of the country.
Agreed.
But it's still, I mean, whether it's 1 or 10 bad apples, I mean, it is still something that needs a lot more light shed on it and to really be focused in and say, okay, well, what can we change within, whether it's, policies or, whatever it may be, to help really decrease that 1 bad apple or prevent that and significantly reduce this.
Right. Especially whenever you see in different scenarios, if you get a bad apple or you have a bad apple who's had a bad experience, and you don't respond the right way, then it can go downhill pretty fast. I think there was a shooting in South Carolina where a guy was just trying to reach his license because the officer told him to reach for his license. And I think he was out of the car, the image that I have. And I think he got shot. He survived. And the sad thing is, I can almost talk about it so cavalierly because it's kind of common.
Right.
Like, which guy was it that got shot?
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think that officer had some history, and so that was a negative side. And then, I mean, and the reality is there are a lot of people who do stupid things and put law enforcement in position that they have to defend themselves. But the goal is to try to make sure, like you said, that those bad apples provide a sense of justice for everybody.
Right.
But I
think you talking about it, it's sort of like, I'm not making this a parallel, but it's sort of like domestic violence or child abuse. You just don't talk about it. And especially someone of your prominence, to be able to speak your story and tell your story, I think can give permission for a lot of other men, Black men, to do the same thing. So I think that's part of why it's a powerful story, but for you to have the bravery to come out and do it and ask others to do the same, I think is very powerful.
Well, I also want to make sure that one of the reasons why I point out the stats of 3 and 12 is because I'm cautious. I don't want law enforcement to think that I'm bashing on law enforcement in general, because there's a lot of discussion going on now, but kind of going back to where we said before, just making people realize that the experience is real and the sentiment and the emotion is real. And so when you try to figure out why are people so much up in arms over what happened in Minnesota with one incident, and evil is evil. So evil doesn't have to be prejudice. I mean, there's been some discussion about whether or not the killing of George Floyd was race motivated or you're just an evil guy.
Right.
But when you take it and pile it on with the other experiences of my experience and the experiences of people who shared information with me, then it triggers some emotions. And just like with domestic violence cases, you can be a victim for so long, but at some point in time, if you have the ability and the access, and without the access to relief or justice in some sort of way, then you never know how the victim will respond.
That's right, exactly. So I know as a judge, it's hard for you to, you sort of have to keep in the square box. What can we do? How can we help? I mean, especially in the legal profession, what is it how we can help this cause? What can we do?
Actually, what you're doing right now, I think, is one of the best things that a lot of people can do, which is, I mean, it doesn't have to be me, but inviting someone or just giving life or exposure to the reality of it.
Right.
And what's helpful tonight, I think, or for this occasion, is the fact that somebody else is doing it. The thing that concerns me right now is, when I say someone else, I mean, you give me the opportunity to share my experience. One of the concerns that I have is that there are so many people who want attorneys or somebody who's white to come out and say something in the exact form or the exact way they want you to say it. And if you don't say it in the right way, then it's as if they try to make you just as bad as like the Grand Wizard of the KKK, because you can't articulate it the right way. And so sharing experiences of what you've seen and the realities of what you know to be true with other people who may feel comfortable for some reason or another, discounting experiences like mine and be like, no, I'm familiar with some folks, and that I believe that. I believe that actually exists.
Right. I mean, it's an uncomfortable conversation that we're not used to having, and so it's sort of like the more you do something, the easier it gets, and then we can start moving forward. So so I think just getting education is power, and getting it out there. So it's just a system we have to work within, which is flawed in itself, quite frankly. But
yeah, and I would say, I mean, you're in this awesome position to, you've unfortunately had these experiences yourself, but then you've also dedicated yourself professionally to the very system that we're trying to work towards reforming, and to remove that racial bias. So 2 questions related to that. One, as closely as you work with law enforcement, and again, I know there are confines here, but do you have any remarks, or I'll couch it this way, any educational remarks regarding the defund the police movement?
Yeah, you've already kind of pointed out, I have to be careful with what I say, not only just from the fact that I work with law enforcement. That's not really the big part. It's just judicial standards tries to make sure that we don't say anything that would impugn the appearance of justice whenever we are in court. That being said, I'm not familiar with who created the phrase defund the police. What I can tell you, my understanding, and I'll try to come back to that. My understanding is that isn't necessarily in all cases. For some people, it means get rid of the police, period. And for some people, it means reallocate or redistribute the money so that the police don't have to they're not in a position to do as much as they are required to do. Frankly, I just had a discussion with a police officer the other day, and he was like, if that's all that it was, he'd be on board for that, because whenever he goes to a domestic violence scene, he has to play social worker. Whenever he goes to some dispute between people who are about to separate and somebody's calling the police and nothing has arisen to the level of a criminal offense, or somebody's taking a child and there's no custody order in place, then they're putting themselves in a role of like a parent coordinator.
Right.
And then whenever they're responding to someone who may need to be involuntarily committed because they're having a mental health breakdown, they're stepping into that role. And so, I mean, just having that conversation with him, and even before that, I was thinking, there are a lot of officers who would say, I don't want to do that.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah, give us more resources, please.
Yeah.
Right. So if you can come up with somebody who's going to respond in an emergency capacity that has that particular training, and then can call us if there's like a criminal offense, a lot of them would be completely on board with that. And so I wonder, and sometimes I think that being a judge may affect my ability to hear people talking past each other, because as a judge, I'm always trying to figure out what the answer is in the middle, or where the truth lies. And the word defund the police, out of all the words in the English language, I don't know if it's the best use of the word.
Agreed.
And so I don't know if that word is prohibiting people from being able to understand what the argument, what the contentions are. And I think I can say that without getting in too much trouble, but I get in trouble anyway.
It's the tightrope you have to walk on sometimes.
Really, exactly.
Yeah, no, I get hit from all sides.
Yeah, but I came from a nonprofit world before I went into law, and I remember at the Covenant for North Carolina Children 20 years ago, we were talking about juvenile justice reform and how that would make an impact on the criminal justice system. And 20 years later, here we are still having the same conversation. I mean, you sort of just want to go put your head up against the wall. But to me, that's what I see as it is, reallocating resources to get on the front end so that on the back, you take care of the issues and the problems before they become a problem is what.
Yeah, and I guess that's too hard. I guess that's too hard to put into a hashtag, but I mean, that's really what it
is. You're so right.
You're so right about that.
Yeah.
So, Judge Rozier,
before it was just 140 characters.
Yeah. Do you want folks to reach out to you and tell their story? I mean, where do you want this to go as we wrap up here tonight?
Yes, I would appreciate if you would just share more stories. Easy, Judge Rozier at Gmail. Send them to me. I really would like to be able to collect enough that it presents a valid opportunity for people to be educated about the experiences of others. And actually, I've received a few stories from some of my white colleagues or friends or attorneys who've shared experiences. And I actually enjoy including that, or I would like to include some of those stories as well, because we can get so far to the point that we forget about the fact that, as I said, evil is evil, prejudice is a human quality. And if we can teach everybody that, treat somebody, gather all the facts. I mean, there are times where I heard someone mention before that they, in their opinion, they feel like while they believe that other races have the opportunity to prove themselves after they, or educate people about who they are, that as an African American, we have to prove who we're not. And so taking the time to put stories together may help people just realize, okay, I just need to hit the pause button and find out if this person is crazy or sane before I make a judgment.
Right, and it also provides the folks who are telling their story an opportunity to be empowered too. So it's a positive on both ends, I think. So Judge Rozier, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was really an honor to have you here and moving things forward and letting us know how we can help is really powerful, and we appreciate that.
Oh, yeah. You're welcome. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk, and in some ways it's therapeutic for me.
Well, good.
I echo Elizabeth's sentiments. Thank you so much, and thank you for the moment of prayer that you and some of the other judges coordinated at the courthouse a couple of weeks ago. One of the things that stood, I mean, there were many moments. I felt so rejuvenated and empowered after that. But was, that you guys just wanted to, take your judges caps off and just come out and be people and be a part of the community and, be uplifting and focusing on the good that is still in the world and removing the evil and moving forward, unite as a united front for what is good and just. So thank you to you and your colleagues for organizing that and having that moment. And thank you so much for carving out time, lending your time and your experience and your strength and courage and vulnerability to us tonight to share your experience and being just a beacon of progress for our community. And hopefully that will trickle on out into the world.
All right. Bye, guys. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Appreciate you all taking the time.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.